Thank you for joining us as we talk today about human trafficking in North Carolina. I am Elizabeth Hunter. I am the Divisional Anti-Human Trafficking Director for the Salvation Army of the North and South Carolina Division, and more specifically oversee Project Fight, which is the anti-human trafficking arm of the Salvation Army here in the Carolinas. So I'm really glad to be able to share with y'all a little bit. Today we'll be talking about who are we, who is Project Fight, and what does the Salvation Army have to do with this effort? What is human trafficking and how does it look within our state here in North Carolina? So hopefully this is a good experience and you learn a little something today. So let's get started. So the Salvation Army has been doing anti-trafficking work for a very long time. For those of y'all who are not familiar, the Salvation Army started in 1865 in London, England, out of the idea that people were coming to churches seeking help, seeking acceptance and love, and were not finding that. And so William and Catherine Booth, our founders, started the Salvation Army. And very early on in our history, they did outreach to women and girls coming out of prostitution, which today we would call sex trafficking. In 1884, they opened their first rescue home for women and girls escaping prostitution in London. And then by 1885, we played a very pivotal role in the Steed Act in London, England, which changed the age of consent for young girls to 15. So the Salvation Army has had a role in this since our early days. Around 1891, the Salvation Army opened a match factory in the Bow district of London. And this match factory was operating and was very poor wages for the employees, very unsafe working conditions, long hours, very unfair treatment. Today, what we would probably identify as labor trafficking to some extent. And so we opened it and we were able to start paying fair wages, making the conditions safer. There was some phosphorus issues with the matches they were making that were making the workers very, very sick. And so was able to really kind of turn that around and help with the match factory. So early days working in the match world of we're fighting labor trafficking. You can see it pictured above. That's a box of the matches that we created. And at the bottom, you can even see it says fair wages for fair work. So part of our history, we're really proud of that. By the early 1900s, Salvation Army, of course, at that point had come over to the United States and spread in other parts of the world. And at that time, we had over 117 rescue homes around the world for women and girls coming out of prostitution. So this was a very strong part of our history. We did not just wake up one day and say, this sounds like a good idea to do. We had been doing this for years and reaching some of the most vulnerable people within our communities. Today, Salvation Army is in over 100 countries. And so we continue this work today all around the world. But specifically here in the United States, there are over 43 anti-human trafficking programs in the United States. Those programs look very different depending on where you are. Some of them are drop-in centers, so where women or men can come in during the day. Those are specifically for probably more sex trafficking. And while they are not working during the day, they have a place to come and get a hot meal, a shower, and maybe a little bit of rest and love. And so they are able to really get nurtured and hopefully see that they have a way out. Other locations provide safe housing, as well as case management services, employment training, lots of different types of programs around the U.S. that the Salvation Army is doing. But what we're going to talk about is the one that's here in North Carolina. And Project Fight started back in 2011. Started out of the idea we were serving all these people in our shelter right off of Moore Square Park in downtown Raleigh, and identifying that we were only band-aiding part of their problem and that we really needed to help with a bigger scope of what they were experiencing. The Project Fight started with the goal to serve 20 people in the first year, and we quickly grew. We surpassed that number within the first few months. and the need was just incredible. So Project Fight now serves all 100 counties in the state of North Carolina, and we have 7 regional offices in Asheville, Boone, Charlotte, Durham, Greenville, and Raleigh. We have 1 case manager in all those locations, and then in our Raleigh office, we have 3 case managers. So we are growing, and we are almost always at capacity. The need is incredible in the state of North Carolina. Oftentimes people ask us who we serve, and the answer simply is we serve everyone. We serve sex and labor trafficking. We serve adults and minors. We have served upwards of someone in their 60 to close to 70-year-old, as well as young as 11 years old. So we have served all the age groups possible, male, female, as well as all other identities. We are very proud that we are one of the few organizations that will serve any identity regardless, and provide safe housing and care and case management to those individuals, no matter how you identify. It doesn't matter. We also serve domestic and foreign-born undocumented. This is something that a lot of people will only serve American-born clients, but we do serve foreign-born undocumented, and it's a little bit different process, a little bit longer case management process, but we serve both populations. So when we say we serve everyone, we mean we serve everyone. Anyone that could be a victim would be potentially eligible for our program and services. And what do we do? So we serve all these people. What do? We provide survivor services and recovery, which means we are providing comprehensive case management from the moment of identification all the way through to restoration. And that can last anywhere from a couple hours to literally a couple of years. It really depends on each person's individual case plan, what their goals are, what challenges they have that they're facing. But we help them through all of that until they are back on their feet and ready to be stable and ready to kind of just start that next journey. We provide a 24-hour hotline that goes along with our survivor services. So we operate that within the state here ourselves, and we'll respond to calls from potential victims needing support anywhere in the state. We also provide awareness and outreach, similar like we're doing now with presentations and educating people about what is trafficking, what it isn't, anything that will help to further awareness around what human trafficking is or how to prevent human trafficking. We want to spread that awareness as far and wide as possible. We do outreach. We have focused our victim outreach mostly on our labor trafficking population in migrant farm camps. And that has been a very unique experience and a learning experience, and something that takes quite a while to build those partnerships and relationships with the workers. It's not a quick build of a partnership, but that is kind of how we do our outreach. We do a lot of partnership and advocacy, partnership with tons of organizations that we work with around the state. We firmly believe we cannot do this work alone. We have to have other people by our side. So we have organizations that we work with who help provide and fill in the gaps where we're unable to meet the need. And then also working in partnership with individuals who support us, whether that be through prayer or financially or collecting hygiene items or clothes. We want to partner with the community to help support this effort. And then advocacy for our survivors, advocacy for state level changes. We want to be an advocate for the anti-human trafficking movement, and really just making sure that our voice and that the survivors' voices are heard, and that we can have an impact on change. So now that we've kind of talked a little bit about who we are and what we do, what in the world is human trafficking? And some of you may know what it is, some of you may not, but we're just going to kind of do a brief overview and discuss a little bit. Human trafficking, according to federal and state law here in North Carolina, is defined as follows: minors involved in commercial sex, period. There is no such thing as a child prostitute. No child can choose to participate in commercial sex without that being a human trafficking charge. Children do not get to make that choice. So if any minor is involved in commercial sex, it is automatically human trafficking, and the perpetrator would be charged. Adults performing a sex act induced by force, fraud, or coercion. Those are really important elements that we'll talk about here in a few minutes, but those elements have to be present for law enforcement prosecution. But any adult performing a sex act by force, fraud, or coercion. For labor trafficking, children and adults performing labor induced by use of force, fraud, or coercion. You'll notice with labor, there's not that caveat of a minor. As far as if a minor does it, it's automatic. With labor trafficking, there does have to be the elements of force, fraud, or coercion. And then organ trafficking. Organ trafficking does happen. It is very real. It is not common in the United States to see. This does happen more often in other countries, but it is a reality. And so I wanted to share that. We did have a client recently in our services who actually was a victim of organ trafficking. This does happen, but again, it's not something that's happening as often as these other two forms here in our communities. Worldwide, 40.3 million people are victims of human trafficking, and this is pretty just astonishing number. This number includes child brides, which is legal here in the United States. And many states have child bride laws on the books, and girls very young can get married with the consent of their parents. But 43 million people, we're not talking about 40.3 million iPhones or 40.3 TVs or Xboxes. We're talking about humans are victims of trafficking worldwide. Of that number, 25%, got ahead of myself here, all victims represent all demographics. Anyone can be a victim of trafficking, right? People often will say, well, it's only one group, only one socioeconomic status, one race. No, it doesn't matter. Traffickers don't care who you are. They don't care where you come from. The one thing that makes a person a potential victim is a vulnerability, and traffickers know how to prey on that. So absolutely anyone can be a victim of trafficking. And now here we go. 25% of victims are children. Our most vulnerable right there, kids, the ones who don't know how to sometimes help themselves get out of a situation or easily get manipulated. 25% are kids. 75% are women and girls. And this is a pretty interesting number because if you look at it, that means there's 25% missing, right? Which would mean that's men. Men do not often come forward to report trafficking. They are much more likely to not want to do that because of just a number of different factors, a lot of it being, more of a masculine type of pride. And so if men came forward more likely, that number would actually increase. But according to what we see in numbers today, 75% are women and girls, meaning 25% would be males. So what does sex trafficking look like here in North Carolina? In North Carolina, we see it identified in these different areas. The National Human Trafficking Hotline has identified over 20 different typologies of human trafficking, meaning different categories or industries in which it happens. And these are the ones that we primarily see here. For sex trafficking, a lot of people might think, why agriculture farm work? That doesn't make sense. But farm workers or growers and leaders will, on payday, to keep their workers happy, bring women in and provide an opportunity for men to purchase sex. And so that's why we see it in the agriculture and farm work industry. You have online and internet. Online and internet, used to happen more like on Backpage, which was similar to Craigslist. You could go online, you could sell a car, you could sell a couch, a TV, but there also was a section where you could easily sell a person. And there would be an ad with pictures and explicit language, and you could kind of make those arrangements there. A couple years ago, Backpage was shut down by the federal government due to new legislation that was passed. And we're really happy about it. It has made law enforcement's job really difficult because now most of the online solicitation and internet trafficking is happening on websites that are held in other countries. And so people, you were unable to really get that information as readily as we were before for prosecution, for arrest, and for identifying possible victims. So it's made our jobs a lot harder, but online and internet trafficking is real. Not to mention all the dangers around children being on the internet. It's just a really huge issue that we've even learned more about just in the last year since everyone's been at home. Pornography, people often think pornography is consensual. Oftentimes it is not. Victims are often forced to perform acts to make pornography, and it is not their choice to do that. They are forced to do that. They are often drugged to be able just to perform the act at that time. Brothels, hotels, truck stops, personal sexual servitude, meaning people who have people working for them in their home just for them to have for sexual purposes. Bars and strip clubs, pimping. Pimping is what we probably historically think of when we think of sex trafficking or prostitution. But pimping in the life is very common and an industry that we see rather often with victims that we support. And then family facilitated. We would like to think families wouldn't ever traffic their family members, but more likely than not, most of our clients have either been trafficked by a parent, by a sibling, or an aunt and an uncle. And this is just really, really common, more common than most people think, to be trafficked by family. So those are the industries in which we see sex trafficking. Now we'll talk a little bit about labor trafficking and what that looks like in our state. It looks a little bit different. Of course, we still have that agriculture farm work. We know that's huge in the state of North Carolina, so we have a lot of that happening here. Door-to-door sales. How many of y'all have gone and bought a magazine? Somebody came to your door, sold one, and then you never got it. We hear that almost always when we do a presentation, that somebody has bought a magazine and never received it. They will put people in a van in a neighborhood, and you have a quota for the day to reach. And when you've reached your quota, you can go back home. Very common. It's also pretty common around college-age kids. They kind of fall for this idea of door-to-door sales during the summer. So something to just kind of look out for on our college campuses. Illicit massage industry. I'm sure many of y'all have heard about this on the news, but these exist in many different places and storefronts, but they also exist kind of behind the scenes. We found a trend of these moving more to apartments and homes because when they're in a storefront, they're more visible. But the illicit massage industry is a very, very deep crime and has roots back to China and Thailand. Very, very hard cases to crack. They take years and years of investigation if you can even get victims to cooperate on a case. We see this in construction and panhandling. Panhandling, none of us would kind of think that that was real. We just think it's somebody begging for money, right? But we actually had a case out in the eastern part of the state where a man was providing housing as like a halfway house for men coming out of prison. And he would then bust these men up during the day in a van and take them to panhandle, would take their money and horrible living conditions. He was forcing them to panhandle for a place to stay and food to eat. So this is one we're kind of learning more about, becoming more on our forefront of thinking when we see what's going on. Sale of illicit drugs. Again, we often think these people are choosing to sell drugs, but there are folks who are forced to do that. They do not choose to sell drugs. They don't choose to bring drugs across the border. We have had clients who are forced by the cartels or by very violent groups to bring drugs across the border. sell drugs here in the US. And if they didn't, there were very violent consequences for that. But law enforcement struggled sometimes to see that as trafficking because it does look like you're just selling the drugs. But this is one area that is the hardest, I think, when we deal with clients because legally, because it does just have that really, really gray line. Like it's not black and white, and it's hard to figure out how to help those individuals. But sale of illicit drugs, just kind of wanted to bring that one up. Restaurant and hotel industries, we're talking about in the background of those places. It's probably not the people working the front desk, but the restaurant workers in the back, the dishwashers, the kitchen help, or the hotel. It would be like the housekeepers and people that are working more in the background. So they're not going to be in the forefront being seen every day, but they are being used as cheap labor and being trafficked. And again, family facilitated. I talked about that a little while ago. We would like to think this doesn't happen, but it does. And families traffic people every single day. When we talk about labor, what does that number really look like? Well, 81% of people are trapped in forced labor in the world. That is in large part to what we consume as consumers. When you look at our clothes we wear, the electronics that we buy, the food that we eat, all of that ties back into forced labor to some degree. You can visit slaveryfootprint.com, I believe it is. If you just Google slavery footprint, it is a really neat opportunity to see like what your impact is on forced labor. But that's a pretty large number. The large number when we think most organizations focus just on sex trafficking, and we really miss the mark on serving labor trafficking victims because it's hidden more. It's not as much out in the front, and it's not talked about as much by people. So we try to really still remind folks that that's a form of trafficking. It's just as real as sex trafficking. So we talked a few minutes ago about force, fraud, and coercion. There's three essential elements in trafficking that if you have a case, you have to have one of these elements to be able to prosecute it, to make an arrest, whatever. Wanted to just kind of share a little bit about what does that look like for each one, right? Force, we are talking about physical assaults. We're talking about gang rapes, restraints, being bound, food deprivation, days of food deprivation, or maybe just like a little bit of food, but like days of not eating a true nourished meal. When we think of our sex trafficking workers, they often work lunch hours, they work evening hours into the early morning hours, and then they're back up working for people who are on their way to work and buying sex at that point. So their amount of sleep and food is very, very minimal. Traffickers will make them reach a quota in order to get food. And if they don't do that, then they don't get food. So we see a lot of food deprivation, sleep deprivation, forced substances because they know you're addicted to that and that they can keep feeding it to you and you'll keep doing what they need you to do so you can get it. Or forced substances because they want you to be able to continue doing it and not fight them. So they will force drugs or alcohol. Confinement or kidnapping. Do want to kind of note these are not the most typical things we see. We don't see people on a regular basis in our services say they were kidnapped. We don't see people saying that they were locked up in chains or in a room. People do get kidnapped, people do get chained up, but that's not the norm. Most of the time, traffickers are developing a relationship. It's a very slow process. They are really forming that bond. And then as soon as they have that bond with you, they start to become manipulative, and the trafficking kind of happens from there. So the trafficking is not like what you would see in Taken, but with Liam Neeson. Like it's not typically like that. It's a very strategic business for a trafficker. Then we have fraud. Fraud can be false promises of just about anything, romance or relationships. Sometimes we see forced marriages or a marriage that you thought you were in love, and then all of a sudden, like they're having you do things that was not part of actual love, right? We see false promises of employment, a better life. That is the most common. They always promise a better life. We can get you money, we can get you this, um, and it doesn't happen. Better life for education, better life for citizenship in the United States. Um, all those promises they will make to try to get you to either come work for them or continue to do what they want you to do. Increasing debt, debt that continues to grow and you can never pay it back. Recruitment traps. It's too good to be true. It's too good to be true. Like, that's just kind of the reality. But unfortunately, when you're dealing with vulnerable people, oftentimes their rational skills, their problem solving skills, their critical thinking skills are not always where they need to be. And so they fall for those kind of get rich quick schemes, which I hate to use that term, but really that it's too good to be true kind of thing. And then we look at coercion. And coercion is the threats, the harm that they may, threaten against you or your family. Psychological manipulation, incredible psychological manipulation when it comes to human trafficking. Document confiscation, taking your documents. See this a lot with our undocumented individuals. They'll be left with no documentation and they're stuck here in a country where they're not a citizen and they have no way to prove that they should be here. Shame and fear inducing threats, whether that be about the family, about who you are as a person, or whether it be threatening to call police, threatening legal ramifications against you, anything to coerce you to stay in that situation a trafficker will use. So we've touched on what is trafficking, kind of a really quick overview. I could dive much deeper into this, but I just wanted to give a quick snapshot as to what trafficking is. And most people would say, that sounds crazy. There's no way that this happens in the United States, no way that this happens in North Carolina, no way that this happens in my neighborhood. Well, in reality, it does. Human trafficking has happened and been found in all 50 states in North Carolina, in the United States, as well as North Carolina. It is not a respecter of persons. It's everywhere. And so this is definitely happening in our state and in our community. North Carolina consistently ranks in the top 10 states for cases reported of human trafficking to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. This number is a little bit skewed, and so it could put us much higher on the list because these are just numbers that are reported to the National Hotline. We receive numbers every year that are never reported. And so the numbers that they have are not quite as accurate as we would all love them to be, but it does give a reflection of kind of where the states stand. So we've consistently been in the top 10 in the United States. And you may say, why North Carolina? What makes us special? Why would we have trafficking here? Well, we have a lot of factors going against us as a state. Number one, we have an interstate system that runs all up and down the East Coast. We have interstates that take you out west. And we have really good transportation for traffickers to move their victims from place to place. And really kind of seamlessly doing that, keeping them on the move, not keeping them in one place very long. We just have that really good interstate system, which is great when you want to drive somewhere, but it's not so great when we consider what trafficking looks like here. We have a lot of coastal tourism. And when you think on the coast, people are vacationing, people have money to spend, and they're willing to spend that on things that possibly are illicit, and sex trafficking comes into play with that. We have military bases here. Not sure if y'all are familiar with that, but we have a lot. And with military bases and military towns come adult entertainment. That is just a fact. It is not to say that the military supports it. It is merely to say that in military towns, there is a large number of adult entertainment establishments, and that they know that they have a population of people that will buy it. And so they set up shop. And so we have a lot of that here, which really does kind of put us in a precarious situation. Here in North Carolina, I mentioned it briefly, but we have a lot of agriculture. We are one of the largest H-2A visa holders as a state in the US, which means we have a lot of migrant farm workers that come into our country every year to work. And a lot of them are trafficked every year right here in our own state under our own eyes. And it's just a huge, huge industry. A lot of seasonal farm work. Farm work goes from about March to October. And during that time, we have a lot of workers coming in who are potentially trafficked. We have meat processing. I didn't realize this until a couple years ago, but we have a huge pork industry. I don't know where I've been. High demand for cheap labor. And there you go, right there, potential at trafficking. We do know that many of our meat processing plants, we have had people who are trafficked, other organizations have served, and so just a vulnerable population. And then we have a large number of universities in this state, over 85 across the whole state. And when we look at a university, we have a population of students who still haven't totally formed all the critical thinking, all the best decision making skills that they need, and they make poor decisions. We also have a population who's desperate for money, who needs to connect and be able to pay bills. And so sometimes they are willing to do things that might sound sketchy, they haven't thought it through, and it turns really bad really quick. We do know of a girl several years ago. She was an RA on her college campus. She got a job to model, and the modeling kind of went explicit. And she thought it was a one-time thing. She was good with that. She was gonna, do it, be done, make the money. And they used the pictures as blackmail against her and forced her to continue working for them until she was able to get out. So this happens on our college campuses, and that's kind of why North Carolina. When we look at the state, I wanted to share this. I got this information from the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. These are total ads in North Carolina by region. So when I say ads, I mean ads for sex trafficking. These would have been some of what would have come from Backpage.com, but also from all the other websites that are out there that people are using. These are not websites that you and I frequent. They are specific to looking for services such as this. So it's not going to be your everyday website. Craigslist Backpage used to be part of it, but now it's moved to a little bit more other websites like Skip the Games, Rub Maps, different things like that. You can see that we have in different areas a very, very large numbers. In Charlotte, which is number one in our state for human trafficking, 174,000, almost 175,000 ads in 1 year for trafficking. The Fayetteville area, what do we have in Fayetteville? We have a military base, 103,000 ads in that area. Unbelievable. And then you have Raleigh and Greensboro who have 90,000 or a little bit more. This happens, guys. This is not something that is happening just in other countries. This is happening in our state. Even look at Boone. We have an office in Boone. And I remember when we opened that office, people told me, why in the world are you going to Boone? There's no trafficking up there. 4,100 ads for sex trafficking in Boone. Crazy. A lot of labor trafficking up in that area, but 4,100 ads for sex trafficking in the Boone High Country area. So just something to kind of give a perspective of what that looks like. These numbers are pretty astonishing to me when we consider, again, this is in our neighborhood. So I wanted to share a couple case studies. I wanted to make sure that you could kind of relate to how this is happening in our state. And it's in the news. I don't know how often you hear it, but it is in the news. And so we're going to start with a case that really is one that's near and dear to my heart, just because we were a part of helping one of the victims. The individual I'm about to share with you, these were the charges that he faced. And he faced a total of 13 charges, 2 counts of sex trafficking, 2 counts of sex trafficking a minor. His minors were 15 and 16, I believe. 1 count involving the manufacture of child pornography. Remember, we talked about that. 6 counts of interstate transportation for purposes of engaging prostitution. So he moved them around on the interstate, meaning he moved them from state to state. 1 count use of internet to promote unlawful business. 1 count of interstate transportation of a minor for illegal sexual activity. This man faced a lot of charges. It is not common for someone to face this many charges and get charged and found guilty, to even face much time. Because victims don't always cooperate. This is Brandon Marquis Jennings. Mr. Jennings trafficked women between 2013 and 16. His youngest victim was 15. He trafficked people across the entire U.S., really. I mean, he was in North Carolina, went out to Southeast Texas, out to the West Coast. He really took his operations around the whole U.S. He deprived his victims of food, withheld money, and very violently physical and mentally abusive. Promised them love and money. That's how he kind of got them involved, and promised them love, money, any promises he could give them. Mr. Jennings was found guilty on all 13 counts of trafficking and was sentenced to 5 life sentences in prison. He will never see the light of day again. He is away for a very long time. We partnered with Raleigh Police Department on this case, and I am just really proud of the work that they did as far as working on this. And this is incredible. I don't know how much to really emphasize that. He got convicted on all 13 counts, and it was because all those women stood on the stand and told their story. And we would love to see this outcome more often for the victims that we and survivors that we serve. This is a very difficult thing when you are a survivor and you're trying to heal, but your perpetrator is not facing the judgment, and sometimes walking free on the streets. It's very difficult. So for our survivors, this was a huge win and something we celebrated with them for sure. These guys were arrested in January of 2019, and this is still actually an active case. They were arrested for keeping a 14-year-old girl against her will on Capitol Boulevard and in Raleigh. As you can see, they faced 3 charges. Part of that was promoting prostitution, sexual servitude, human trafficking. Again, this happens right here in our neighborhoods. And she was 14. Pretty crazy. The next case I'm going to share with you is a little bit different. It's actually a case regarding an illicit massage business that we partnered with law enforcement on. They were charged with promoting prostitution as well as 2 other charges that you see there. This spa, this illicit massage business, had been under investigation for quite some time. Unfortunately, illicit massage businesses, as I mentioned, is a very, very just dynamic investigation. When you think of what illicit massage businesses look like and their connections, it is almost like a spider web, the most beautiful spider web you've ever seen, and it's so interconnected. It is serious organized crime. These individuals, their charges were dropped and they did not face any trial, but this is sad because we know that for our victims in illicit massage businesses, they do not often seek help. They are scared. There's a lot of stigma in the Asian community with admitting that things have happened. And so this is just a really sad situation. We did offer help to, I believe it was 3 women at this location, and they all declined and decided to go back to New York, where they probably were sent back out in traffic, unfortunately. But again, this was in a strip mall in Durham. Here's a case that actually just hit the news this week, or last week. She was charged with forced labor in Davidson County, North Carolina, and she, from 2016 to 2018, forced and coerced a woman into trafficking, threatened her family, physically assaulted her, even set up a debt contract to help her pay off the debt that supposedly this woman was not working to pay off, and threatened law enforcement. And so this lady was just found guilty. She faces up to 20 years in prison, and as well paying restitution to the victim. So we'll see what happens with that. We don't see labor cases often in the news, or often go to court, just because of the nature of what it takes to investigate it, and a victim who's willing to testify. But this is a successful case right here. Another case that just recently came out in the news happened in Greenville, North Carolina. This guy right here held a 16-year-old girl against her will, told her they needed money to live off of. Apparently, this guy had an intimate relationship with this young girl, and it sounds like, she picked the wrong guy, unfortunately. He was charged on 5 of these counts here. Human trafficking of a child is one of them. And unfortunately, she died of an overdose. And he will more than likely be facing some time for this case. But just an example of what's happening here in our state. What in the world is our state government doing about this, right? What's happening? What does this look like at a state level of what's being done? North Carolina received an A rating according to a 2019 report by Shared Hope International. And we are really proud of this rating as a state, because several years ago, we were a C and a B. We were not an A. And we have come a long way to fight the injustices of human trafficking here in North Carolina. I wanted to share, before I share a little bit about some legislation that we have here, just what the numbers look like as far as charges, because this is a very, very common question we get when we do presentations. What is law enforcement doing about this problem? Well, in 2019, you can see that the total charges were 205 charges for 87 defendants of trafficking in the state. And it breaks it down right there for you into human trafficking, involuntary servitude, and sexual servitude. You'll notice there's really not anything specific about labor trafficking. Again, not the most common thing that we're seeing, because it's very, very hidden and very hard to investigate. Then, of course, there's always related charges, and I just wanted to share this so you could kind of see what's being done. You'll see sexual exploitation of a minor, first and second degree. There were 2,600 charges in 2019 for 271 defendants. So law enforcement is investigating this stuff. Our Internet Crimes Against Children teams in the state that we work with, they're doing phenomenal jobs in helping fight this for children. But it's still real, and we still have to be vigilant in helping our kids be aware and know what's happening. And then these are just some additional charges that were in the report from the Human Trafficking Commission that I wanted to share, just so you could kind of get an idea of what other types of charges come along with that. And so oftentimes people think law enforcement's not doing anything, but it's a big job to fight these crimes and fight these injustices. And it takes partners, Project Fight, working with victims, and other organizations working with victims and survivors to really help them be stable, so that when the court case comes up, they have a case that they can take to court. And also, counties with the highest number of charges, Cumberland County is number 1, because they have a 100% dedicated department to human trafficking, and that's all that they work. But then you'll see in Wake County, we are number 2, both in 2018 and 2019. We don't have 2020 data yet, unfortunately, but this gives you a picture in recent years. Our Wake County, especially Raleigh Detective Division, is phenomenal. They are just some of the best and do great work, as well as the Cumberland County folks. They both do just amazing, amazing work. And then these other agencies are doing good stuff too. I just don't work with them as much, but you can see that they all have charges and are identifying it and bringing this to justice. So at a larger level in our state, we have some legislation that's been passed over the years that has made a huge impact in the work that we do against trafficking. And in 2016, legislation was passed that required trafficking prevention and awareness be taught in every middle school. This is pretty monumental in that this means kids have to learn what it is, how to prevent it. We're not just ignoring the issue anymore. We're really trying to help kids learn what red flags are and how to identify safe spaces and safe people and really being aware of their surroundings. I will say that kids, most of the time when I do children presentations, they know far more about trafficking than I do, and they teach me. So they're aware, but we really want to help them understand like how to prevent it. What is it that you can do to help prevent some of these situations from happening? In 2017, legislation was passed that required certain businesses to post a human trafficking public awareness sign. This includes the hotline number as well as some other information. This is in many businesses. It should be in all businesses that sell alcohol and rest stops and some of the other locations in the state. You may have seen these around as I've traveled the state. I've seen them posted. But this made that required by law that they post that in their business for human trafficking awareness. Then in 2018, a restorative justice piece of legislation was passed, but also legislation that allowed Department of Social Services to investigate cases of potential trafficking that wasn't necessarily done by the family or a caregiver. Historically, social services would only investigate a case if the parent did the perpetrating or if a caregiver did it. And this changed that. It said, no, it doesn't matter who trafficked the person, you can investigate this case, and made a huge difference in the work that we do so that we can now work much easier with Department of Social Services. They can do screenings better. It's just hopefully going to be more of a cohesive approach in the social service system. We know that foster care kids are some of the most vulnerable individuals at being trafficked, and so this hopefully will have huge impacts down the road for us. In 2019, legislation was passed that said all school personnel needs to be trained on child sexual abuse and sex trafficking. And this was monumental because we already had said the kids needed to be trained, but now we're saying all school personnel who see things that we don't see, your janitor, your cafeteria staff, your teachers, everybody has to now be trained on this. And this has been very exciting to see the schools take it under and really seek that training. We have provided training for some of the schools in the state, as well as some of the other agencies that we work with are able to provide that training. And then we also have legislation that really expanded expunction law so that our victims and survivors don't have to live with charges that they faced during their entire trafficking situation. A lot of times we'll see that people will come to us with prostitution charges and drug charges, and it's all a product of their trafficking. And so to have that on their record for their life is very hard to find recovery and restoration. And through this expunction, it does help them on that journey. So this has been pretty exciting legislation that has passed to help survivors really find healing. And then lastly, in 2019, it wasn't legislation, but the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission adopted standards for direct service providers, giving us guidance on best practices, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, what best practices kind of look like, and then also helping them to kind of guide organizations as they come in the state wanting to start services, giving that guidebook kind of this is what it should look like. And Project Fight was part of developing those standards. So we're really proud of that. This year we have, in the last year, we've worked with the Public Health Committee of the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission. They are working on developing curriculum for all healthcare workers in the state. So that's up and coming and hopefully will be finished this year. But doing great work with the commission, and they always do amazing things. So in the state, we do all this. We've talked about what it is. We've talked about what we do. We've talked about what legislation's in place. But what's happening for the victims on like the most crisis level response? And that's where these regional response teams come into play. They are the response system in the first 24 to 48 hours. And Project Fight is very privileged to lead 4 of these teams in the state. And we partner with many others. And we work with law enforcement, with local providers to respond to a case as and when it happens very quickly, trauma informed, and in a way that's going to help that victim have the most success and become a survivor. And so that's what our regional response teams look like. You can tell we have quite a few areas we still need to grow. But since I started this position, this map has filled out quite a bit. So it's exciting to see that the work is expanding and people are starting to do more response here in our state. I just wanted to share, we can't do this work alone, and I've mentioned that a couple of times. We work with partners throughout the state. I couldn't list every partner that we work with because there's so many. But these are a few of our partners that do serve the entire state of North Carolina. And they are very important to the work that we do. We value our partnership with Legal Aid, who provides a lot of legal services for our clients. They do some phenomenal work and have really played a pivotal role for our survivors getting expunctions, getting legal status in the United States, and some even restitution from their traffickers. We also work really closely with the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. I mean, just one of our most critical statewide partners that we have. They have 8 trained detectives, agents who are specifically trained on human trafficking. And it's technically a department of 1. These 8 people are trained on top of the jobs that they already have. But if we call them, they are available to us at the drop of a hat and just really respond and care about these cases in a phenomenal way. So we really appreciate the SBI. The North Carolina Stop Human Trafficking has been a partner of ours for a while now. We work with them. They do a lot of training, and they lead the Pitt County Coalition Against Human Trafficking. We just really value what they bring to the table and the education and awareness that they bring to the state. As well as Shield, North Carolina. If you don't know Shield, North Carolina, and you're interested in getting your local government involved, I would suggest reaching out to them and really connecting. They are just a phenomenal group of folks. They advocate for policy. They advocate for services for law enforcement to be able to do their job better. Just a really good group of people in the advocacy arena of trafficking. And then, of course, the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission. They are the governor appointed, legislatively appointed commission, and they have legislative mandates that they must meet. But they do excellent work in guiding the anti-human trafficking movement in this state and really leading the way for the work that we're able to do every day. So I've shared a lot, and I hope that it was beneficial, and I know there's probably still a lot of questions to be had. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. This work that we do is so complex, but we are privileged to be able to do it, and privileged to be able to do it alongside some amazing people in our state. So if you have questions, again, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to connect. I'm happy to do a presentation for you or your group if you need that. As well, you can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram, and we try to keep that up to date with facts and things that are happening, and also on our website. We want to thank you so much for joining us.